Merry Christmas, everyone. This story had no real title when it come to me. The only thing I could think is My Daddy the Angel. It was Christmas Eve, 1942. I was 15 years old and feeling like the world had caved in on me because there just hadn't been enough money to buy me the rifle that I wanted for Christmas. We did the chores early that night for some reason. I just figured Daddy wanted a little extra time so we could read in the Bible. Now, after supper was over, I took my boots off and stretched out in front of the fireplace, and I waited for Daddy to get down the old family Bible. I was still feeling sorry for myself and to be honest, I wasn't in much of a mood to read scriptures. But Daddy didn't get the Bible. Instead, he bundled up again and went outside. I couldn't figure it out because we'd already done all the chores. I didn't worry about it long, though. I was busy wallowing in my self pity. Soon he came back in, and it was cold, clear night out, and there was ice in his beard. Come on, Matt, he said. Bundle up good. It's cold outside tonight. I was really upset then. Not only wasn't I getting the rifle for Christmas, now he was dragging me out into the cold, and for no earthly reason that I could see. We'd already done all the chores, and I couldn't think of anything else that needed doing, especially not on a night like this. But I knew he was not very patient at one dragging one's feet when he told him to do something. So I got up and I put my boots back on. I got my coat on. Now, Mommy gave me a mysterious smile as I opened the door to leave the house. Something was up, but I just didn't know what. Now, outside, I became even more dismayed. There in front of the house was the work team, already hitched to the big sled. Whatever it was we were going to do, it wasn't going to be no short, quick job. And it wasn't going to be a little job either. I could tell. We never hitched up this sled unless we were going to haul a big load. Daddy was already on the seat, reins in hand, and reluctantly I climbed up beside him. The cold was already biting at me. I wasn't happy. When I was on, Daddy pulled the sled around the house and stopped in front of the woodshed. He got off and I followed. I think we'll put on the high sideboards, he said. Here, help me, Matt. The high sideboards? It was it's going to be a bigger job than I even wanted to do with just the low sideboards on. But whatever we were going to do, it would take a lot bigger. It would be a lot bigger job with the high sideboards on. Then Daddy went into the woodshed and came out with an armload of wood. The wood I'd spent all summer hauling down from the mountain, then all fall sawing into blocks and splitting. What was he doing? Finally, I said something. I asked, "What are you doing, Dad?" He been He looked at me and he said, "Have you been by Widow Jensen's lately?" Mrs. Jensen lived about 2 miles down the road. Her husband had died a year or so before and left her with 3 children, the oldest being 8. Sure, I've been by, but so what? Yeah, I said, why? Daddy said, I rode by there today. Little Jakey was out digging around in the woodpile trying to find a few chips. They're out of wood, Matt. That was all he said. Then he turned and went back into the woodshed for another armload of wood. I followed him. We loaded the sled so high I began to wonder if the horses would be able to pull it. Finally, he called a halt to our loading. Then we went into the smokehouse, and he took down a big ham and a side of bacon. He handed them to me and told me to put them in the sled and wait. Then When he returned, he was carrying a sack with flour over his right shoulder and a smaller sack of something in his left hand. What's in the little sack? I asked. Shoes, he replied. We're out of shoes. Little Jakey just had gunny sacks wrapped around his feet when he was out in that woodpile this morning. I got the children a little candy, too. It just wouldn't be Christmas without a little candy. Now, we rode the 2 mile to Mrs. Jensen's pretty much in silence. I tried to think through what Daddy was doing. We didn't have much by worldly standards. Of course, we did have a big woodpile, though most of what was left now was still in the form of logs that I would have to saw into blocks and then split before we could use it. And we also had plenty of meat and flour, so we could spare that too. But I knew we didn't have any money, so why was he buying them shoes and candy? Really, why was he doing any of this? Little Jensen had closer neighbors than us. It shouldn't have been our concern. Now, we came in from the blind side of the Jensen house and unloaded the wood as quietly as possible. Then we took the meat, the flour, and the shoes to the door. We knocked. The door opened or cracked, and a timid voice said, Who is it? Lucas Miles, ma'am, and my son Matt. We come We've come could we come in for a little bit, please? Mrs. Jensen opened the door and let us in. She had a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, and the children were wrapped in another and were sitting in front of a fireplace by a very small fire that hardly gave off any heat at all. Mrs. Jensen fumbled with a match and finally lit the lamp. We brought you a few things, ma'am, Daddy said, and set down the sack of flour. I put the meat on the table. Then he handed her the sack that had the shoes in it. She opened it hesitantly and took the shoes out, one pair at a time. There was a pair for her and one for each of the children. Sturdy shoes, the best shoes, shoes that would last. I watched her carefully. She bit her lower lip to keep from trembling, and then tears filled her eyes and started running down her cheeks. She looked up at my daddy like she wanted to say something, but it wouldn't come out. We brought you a load of wood, too, ma'am, he said. Then turned to me and said, Matt, go bring in enough to last a while. Let's get that fire up to size and heat this place up. Now, I wasn't the same person when I come back in after bringing in the wood. I had a big lump in my throat. As much as I hate to admit it, there were tears in my eyes, too. In my mind, I kept seeing those three kids huddled around the fireplace, and the mother standing there with tears running down her cheeks with so much gratitude in her heart she couldn't speak. My heart swelled within me, and the joy that I had never known before filled my soul. I'd been given at Christmas many times before, but never when never when it had made such a difference. I could see we were literally saving the lives of these people. I soon had the big fire blazing, and everyone's spirits soared. The kids started giggling when Dad handed them each a piece of candy, and Mrs. Jensen looked on with a smile that probably hadn't crossed her face in a long time. She finally turned to us. God bless you, she says. I know the Lord has sent you. The children and I have been praying that he would send one of his angels to spare us. In spite of myself, the lump returned to my throat, and the tears welled up in my eyes again. I never thought of my daddy in those terms before, but after Widow Jensen mentioned it, I could see that was probably true. I was sure that a better man than Daddy had never walked the earth. I started remembering all the times he'd gone out of his way for Mommy and me, and many others. The list seemed endless as I thought on it. Daddy insisted that everyone try on the shoes before we left. I was amazed that they all fit, and I wondered how he'd known what sizes to get. Then I guessed that if he was on an errand for the Lord, that the Lord would make sure he got the right sizes. Tears were running down Widow Jensen's face again when we stood up to leave. My daddy took each of the kids in his big arms and gave him a hug. They clung to him and didn't want us to go. I could see that they missed their daddy, and I was glad I still had mine. At the door, he turned to Widow Jensen and said, The missus wanted me to invite you and the children over to Christmas dinner tomorrow. The turkey will be more than the three of us can eat, and the man can get cantankerous if he has to eat turkey for too many meals. We'll be by to get you all about 11 o'clock. It'd be nice to have some little ones running around. Matt here hasn't been little for quite a spell. I was the youngest. My two brothers and two sisters were all married and moved away. Mrs. Jensen nodded and said, Thank you, Brother Miles. I don't know what to say. May the Lord bless you. I know for certain that he will. Out on the sled, I felt warmth that come from deep within. I didn't even notice the cold. When we had gone a ways, Daddy turned to me and said, Matt, I want you to know something. Your mother and me have been tucking a little money away here and there all year long so we could buy that rifle for you, but we didn't have quite enough. Then yesterday, a man who owed me a little money from years back came by to make things square. Now, your mom and me were real excited, thinking now we could get you that rifle, and I started into town this morning to do just that. But on the way, I saw little Jakey out there scratching in the woodpile with his feet wrapped in those gunny sacks, and I knew what I had to do. Son, I spent the money for the shoes and the candy for those children, and I hope you understand. I understood. My eyes became wet with tears again. I understood very well. I was so glad Daddy had done it. Now the rifle seemed very low on my list of priorities. He had given me a lot more. He had given me the look on Mrs. Jensen's face and the radiant smiles of her three children. For the rest of my life, whenever I saw any of the Jensens or split a block of wood, I remembered, and remembering back, that same joy I felt riding home beside my daddy that night. He had given me much more than a rifle that night. He had given me the best Christmas of my life. Folks, remember, God puts us out here to do for everyone. You see a need, fill that need. Wipe your eyes, clear that lump out of your throat. Merry Christmas to y'all.